My wife said, "I sold your old Mustang for $40,000. Her family celebrated, thinking, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I heard the words, but my brain refused to process them. Abigail stood in our kitchen, phone pressed against her ear, her voice bright with satisfaction as she spoke to her sister Sarah. $40,000, she repeated, and I watched her lips curve into that smile I used to find charming. "Can you believe David kept that old thing for so long?" I finally convinced him it was time to let it go. My coffee cup trembled in my hands. The Mustang, my 1967 Mustang Boss 429, the car my father and I had spent 18 years restoring together, bolt by bolt, weekend after weekend, until his hands became too weak to hold the tools. "What did you say?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. Abigail glanced at me, covering the phone with her palm. "Oh, you're awake. I sold the Mustang, got a great price for it, too." She returned to her conversation without missing a beat. "Sarah, you should have seen the dealer's face when I told him 40,000. He practically threw the money at me." The kitchen tiles seemed to shift beneath my feet. I set the coffee cup down before I could drop it, my hands suddenly numb. "You sold my car?" "Our car," she corrected, not even looking at me. "And yes, I got an amazing deal. We're finally going to have some real money for once." The words hit me like physical blows. Our car. As if she had any connection to the hundreds of hours my father and I spent in that garage. The late nights when he taught me the difference between a Windsor and Cleveland engine, the way his eyes lit up when we finally heard that 429 roar to life after 3 years of rebuilding. "Where is it now?" I managed to ask. "Premium Motors downtown. They're handling all the paperwork." She waved her hand dismissively. "Don't worry about the details. I took care of everything." I walked to the window that faced our garage, knowing what I would see but needing the confirmation anyway. The empty space where the Mustang should have been felt like a missing tooth, wrong and aching. 27 years I had owned that car. 27 years since Dad handed me the keys with tears in his eyes, telling me to take care of his baby. "David?" Abigail's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You're being dramatic. It's just a car." Just a car. I turned to look at my wife of 9 years, this woman I thought I knew, and saw a stranger, someone who could sell a piece of my soul and call it practicality. "My father died working on that car," I said quietly. "That was 14 years ago." Her tone was gentle now, the voice she used when she thought I was being unreasonable. "You can't hold on to the past forever. We need to think about our future." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Abigail's face lit up. "That must be my parents. I invited them over to celebrate." Celebrate? They were coming to celebrate the destruction of everything that mattered to me. I stood in the hallway as Abigail opened the front door, watching Margaret and James Wilson enter with bottles of champagne and faces full of excitement. Sarah followed behind them, already pulling out her phone to document the moment. "Where's the man of the hour?" Margaret asked, scanning the room until her eyes found me. "David, congratulations, $40,000. That's more money than some people make in a year." "Finally getting rid of that eyesore," James added with his typical bluntness. "I never understood why you kept that old rust bucket taking up garage space." Rust bucket. The car that had won 3 classic car shows. The car that automotive magazines had featured twice. The car that collectors stopped me on the street to admire. "We're thinking Europe," Sarah announced, spreading tourism brochures across our coffee table. "With 40,000, you could do London, Paris, maybe even Rome. Live a little for once." They continued talking around me, making plans for money that felt like blood money in my veins. I watched them flip through pictures of London hotels and Parisian restaurants, calculating costs and imagining adventures built on the grave of my most precious possession. "David's been quiet," Margaret observed, finally looking at me with those sharp eyes that never missed anything. "Are you okay, honey?" I could have told them then. Could have explained what that car really meant, how my father had searched 3 states to find that particular Boss 429, how we spent every Saturday for 6 years hunting down original parts. Could have described the way Dad's hands guided mine as I learned to rebuild a carburetor. The pride in his voice when the engine finally turned over, the tears we both shed when the restoration was complete. Instead, I said, "I'm fine." Because what was the point? They had already made their decision. The car was gone, sold to strangers who probably saw it as just another classic car to flip for profit. They would never understand that some things cannot be replaced, cannot be valued in dollars and cents. "You know what we should do?" Abigail was saying, her eyes bright with excitement. "We should take a cruise. One of those luxury ones that goes around the Mediterranean. I saw an ad for one that costs $35,000 for 3 weeks. $35,000, almost the entire amount she had received from my father's legacy. My phone buzzed against my leg. I pulled it out, expecting work emails, but the number on the screen made my stomach clench. Premium Motors. "I need to take this," I said, stepping out onto the back porch. "Mr. Hartley?" The voice on the other end was tense, almost panicked. "This is Rick Morrison from Premium Motors. We need to talk about the Mustang your wife brought in." "What about it?" "Sir, there's a problem, a big problem. We need you to come down here right away." "What kind of problem?" There was a long pause. "The kind that involves the police." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. Police? What could possibly involve the police about selling a car? Through the patio door, I could see my wife and her family still planning their celebration trip, still spending money that apparently came with complications none of us had anticipated. Abigail was laughing at something her father said, completely oblivious to whatever storm was brewing. I thought about the way my father used to run his fingers along the Mustang's freshly painted surface, checking for imperfections that only he could see. How he made me promise to never sell it to someone who wouldn't appreciate its history. "It's not about the money, son," he had told me the week before he died. "Some things are worth more than what people will pay for them." Now, as I watched my wife plan a European vacation with the proceeds from his life's work, I was beginning to understand what he meant, and something told me this story was far from over. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and walked inside, where the celebration continued without pause. They had no idea what was coming, neither did I. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's hands, weathered and oil-stained, guiding mine as we worked on the Mustang's engine. The memory was so vivid I could smell the WD-40 and hear the classic rock station playing softly in the background. Beside me, Abigail slept peacefully, her breathing steady and untroubled. How could she rest so easily after what she had done? How could someone sleep soundly knowing they had just destroyed 27 years of memories? At 3 in the morning, I gave up trying and made my way to the garage. The empty space where the Mustang used to sit felt like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. I ran my fingers along the oil stain on the concrete floor, the only evidence that my father's masterpiece had ever existed here. The workbench still held his tools, exactly as he had left them the last time we worked together. I picked up his favorite socket wrench, the one with the worn grip that fit perfectly in his palm. He had bought it in 1971, the same year I was born. "That car is going to be yours someday," he had told me when I was 12. Watching him sand down the rear quarter panel for the 3rd time because the previous attempt hadn't met his standards. "But you have to earn it. You have to understand what it means to build something with your own hands." For 18 years, every Saturday morning meant the same thing. Dad would be in the garage by 7, coffee in hand, ready to tackle whatever piece of the restoration came next. Sometimes, we made significant progress, rebuilding the transmission or installing new suspension components. Other times, we spent entire weekends hunting through salvage yards for a single, specific part that had to be original. "Why does it have to be original?" I had asked him once when I was 16, frustrated after spending a day searching for a particular carburetor part that probably cost 50 cents new but was now impossible to find. "Because anything worth doing is worth doing right," he had answered, wiping his hands on the red shop rag he always kept in his back pocket. This car was built in 1967, and if we're going to bring it back to life, we're going to do it with respect for what it was meant to be. I found that same red shop rag now, folded neatly in the toolbox drawer where I had placed it after his funeral. The fabric was faded, stained with decades of honest work. I held it against my chest, remembering how proud he looked the day we finally finished the restoration. It was spring of 2010. Dad was already getting weaker, the cancer eating away at him despite the treatments, but he had insisted on being there when we started the engine for the first time in 18 years. I still remember the way his eyes lit up when that 429 roared to life, the sound echoing through the garage like thunder. "She sounds perfect," he had whispered, tears streaming down his face. "We did it, son. We actually did it." 3 months later, he was gone. Heart failure, the doctors said. His body had simply given up the fight. But I knew better. He had held on long enough to hear that engine run one more time, long enough to know that his life's work was complete. The Mustang became my connection to him after that. Every Sunday I would take it out for a drive, following the same back roads we used to travel when I was learning to handle its power. I could almost hear his voice guiding me through the turns, reminding me to respect the machine. "Easy on the throttle," he would say. "Let her show you what she can do, don't force it." Now that connection was severed, sold to strangers who probably had no idea what they had bought. I was still standing in the garage at dawn when I heard Abigail moving around in the kitchen. The smell of coffee drifted through the house, followed by the sound of her morning routine, shower, hair, makeup, the same pattern every weekday for 9 years. When I finally came inside, she was dressed for work, looking fresh and unburdened. "You're up early," she said, not looking up from her phone as she scrolled through social media. "Couldn't sleep." "You're not still upset about the car, are you?" Her tone suggested that continuing to grieve would be unreasonable. "David, I know it had sentimental value, but we needed the money." Needed the money. We lived in a comfortable house, drove reliable cars, had steady incomes. We didn't need $40,000 for anything essential. We wanted it for luxuries, for European vacations, and experiences that would fade from memory in months. "Did you forge my signature?" The question came out before I could stop it. Abigail froze, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. "What?" "The title transfer. Did you sign my name?" For just a moment, her mask slipped. I saw something flicker across her face, something that might have been guilt or fear. Then the mask was back, and she was looking at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Of course not. I would never do something like that. I had power of attorney for the sale." I stared at her, trying to read the truth in her expression. "Since when do you have power of attorney for my personal property? We're married, David. What's yours is mine, remember?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Besides, you signed all those papers when we refinanced the house last year, don't you remember?" I didn't remember. But then again, Abigail had handled most of the paperwork for the refinancing, bringing me documents to sign while I was distracted with work or watching television. Had there been a power of attorney buried in all those forms? Had she been planning this for over a year? "I should probably call Premium Motors," I said, watching her reaction carefully. "Why?" The word came out too quickly, too sharp. "To make sure everything went smoothly. It's a lot of money." "Everything's fine, David. They're professionals. You don't need to micromanage every little detail." But something in her voice told me she was lying. Something in the way she wouldn't meet my eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she gathered her work things. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Rick Morrison from Premium Motors. Mr. Hartley, we really need to speak with you today. This is urgent. Please call as soon as possible." I looked up at Abigail, who was checking her appearance in the hallway mirror, apparently unaware of my phone notification. "I think I'll stop by Premium Motors on my way to work," I said casually. She spun around so fast it startled me. "Why, is there a problem?" "Just want to make sure everything's in order." "David, please don't." Her voice carried a note of desperation that she tried to hide. "You'll just embarrass yourself. Let me handle this. Let her handle this. The same way she had handled selling my father's car without asking, the same way she had apparently handled forging documents and lying about power of attorney. I think I can manage a simple conversation with a car dealer, I said. As I drove to Premium Motors that morning, my mind kept returning to the red shop rag in my father's toolbox. He had carried that rag every day for 40 years, through countless repairs and restorations. It represented something solid, something real in a world full of shortcuts and compromises. Abigail had never understood that. She saw the Mustang as an inconvenience, the garage as wasted space, my memories as obstacles to overcome. She had married me expecting to change me, to mold me into someone who valued the same things she did. The parking lot at Premium Motors was buzzing with activity when I arrived. Police cars flanked the entrance, and I could see men in suits moving through the showroom. My stomach dropped as I realized this was far worse than a simple paperwork problem. Rick Morrison met me at the front door, his face pale and sweaty despite the morning chill. "Mr. Hartley, thank God you're here. We have a situation." "What kind of situation?" He glanced around nervously, then lowered his voice. "Your wife's documentation for the Mustang. There are some serious irregularities. The police want to speak with you." As he led me inside, past the luxury cars and confused customers, I thought about the promise I had made to my father. I had sworn to take care of his car, to honor the work we had done together. I was beginning to realize that keeping that promise might require destroying everything else in my life. Detective Sarah Chen looked like someone who had seen everything, but even she seemed shaken as she led me into the conference room at Premium Motors. Her dark eyes studied my face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Mr. Hartley, I need to ask you some questions about the 1967 Mustang Boss 429 that was brought to this dealership yesterday." "What's this about?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would change everything. She opened a manila folder and spread several documents across the table. "Let's start with this. Did you authorize the sale of this vehicle?" I looked down at the paperwork. There was my signature, or what appeared to be my signature, on a title transfer document. But something was wrong with it. The letters looked forced, unnatural. "I didn't sign this," I said quietly. Detective Chen nodded. "We suspected as much. Your wife brought the vehicle in yesterday claiming she had full authority to sell it, but when our forensics team examined the signature, it became clear this was forged." My chest tightened. Abigail hadn't just sold my father's car, she had committed fraud to do it. "There's something else," Rick Morrison said from the corner of the room. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Something we discovered after we started processing the paperwork." He placed a thick folder on the table, filled with what looked like appraisal documents and auction records. "Mr. Hartley, what do you know about your car's history?" "My father and I restored it over 18 years. It's a Boss 429, which makes it somewhat rare, but—" "Sir," Detective Chen interrupted gently, "this isn't just somewhat rare. According to our automotive expert, this is one of only 50 Boss 429 Mustangs ever produced with this specific engine configuration." The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table. "What does that mean?" Rick Morrison cleared his throat. "Mr. Hartley, your wife sold a car worth approximately $400,000 for $40,000. $400,000. The words echoed in my head like gunshots. I thought about Abigail's excitement over 40,000, her plans for European vacations, her family celebrating what they thought was a windfall. "That's impossible," I whispered. "We thought so too," Detective Chen said. "That's why we called in an expert from Barrett Jackson Auctions. He confirmed it. Your Mustang has what's called the Super Cobra jet engine with a specific transmission combination that makes it extraordinarily valuable to collectors." She slid a printout across the table. It was an auction listing from 6 months ago. A car identical to mine had sold for $425,000. "The documentation your father kept was meticulous," Rick added. "Original build sheets, restoration receipts, even photos of the process. This kind of provenance is what collectors pay premium prices for." I stared at the numbers, trying to process what I was hearing. My father had never mentioned the car's potential value. To him, it was never about money. It was about the work, the craftsmanship, the time spent together. But he had kept every receipt, every document, every piece of paper related to the restoration. Had he known? Had he understood what we were creating together but chose not to tell me? "Where is the car now?" I asked. "That's the problem," Detective Chen said. "Your wife's buyer was planning to flip it immediately. He's already contacted 3 different auction houses. When we informed him about the fraud investigation, he threatened to sue us for the difference in value." My phone buzzed. A text from Abigail. "How did the visit to the dealership go? Everything okay?" I showed the message to Detective Chen, who raised an eyebrow. "She doesn't know we've discovered the fraud yet," she observed. "What happens now?" "We need to arrest your wife for document forgery and fraud. The car will be held as evidence until the legal issues are resolved." "But Mr. Hartley, there's something you should know. Your wife isn't just facing criminal charges. The buyer is talking about suing for damages, claiming he was defrauded out of hundreds of thousands of dollars." I thought about Abigail at home, probably still planning her European vacation, her parents celebrating over champagne, Sarah making reservations for luxury hotels they couldn't actually afford. "How long have you known about the car's value?" Detective Chen asked. The question hung in the air. I looked at the auction records, the appraisal documents, the evidence of my father's careful documentation. Had I known? Deep down, had I always suspected there was more to the story? "I knew it was special," I said finally. "But my father never talked about money. He always said the value was in the work we did together." "Mr. Hartley," Rick Morrison said gently, "there's something else in your father's documentation, a letter addressed to you." He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's careful handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. "David," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means someone has finally recognized what we built together. I never told you about the car's monetary value because I didn't want that to change how you felt about it. This Mustang represents 18 years of Saturdays, of shared dreams, of a father and son working side by side. No amount of money could capture that. But I also knew that someday people might try to take advantage of you. I documented everything, kept every receipt and record because I wanted to protect our work. The car is yours now, son. Don't let anyone convince you it's worth less than what it truly represents. The real value isn't in dollars. It's in the love we poured into every bolt, every carefully restored component. But if someone ever tries to steal that from you, make sure they understand what they're really taking. Love, Dad." I sat back in my chair, the letter trembling in my hands. My father had known. He had always known. And he had prepared for this moment, for someone who might try to destroy what we had built. Detective Chen was watching me carefully. "Are you all right, Mr. Hartley?" I folded the letter and put it in my pocket next to my heart. "What do I need to do to get my car back?" "First, we need to complete the investigation. Your wife will need to be questioned about the forged documents. Then there's the matter of the buyer, who's demanding compensation for his losses." I stood up, feeling stronger than I had in years. For the first time since this nightmare began, I knew exactly what I was dealing with. This wasn't just about a car anymore. This was about justice, about honoring my father's memory, about standing up to people who thought they could take whatever they wanted. "Detective Chen, I want to press full charges against my wife for fraud, and I want my father's car back." She nodded. "We'll need you to come to the station later today to give a formal statement. And, Mr. Hartley, you should probably contact a lawyer. This is going to get complicated." As I drove home, I thought about the conversation I was about to have with Abigail. She was expecting me to return with simple confirmation that everything had gone smoothly. Instead, I was coming back with the truth about what she had tried to steal. $400,000, 18 years of work, a lifetime of memories. She had tried to sell all of it for a vacation to Europe. When I pulled into our driveway, I could see Abigail through the kitchen window, on the phone again, probably making more plans for money she no longer had any right to spend. I sat in my car for a moment, my father's letter still warm in my pocket. He had protected me, even from the grave. He had made sure I would have the weapons I needed for this fight. Now it was time to use them. Abigail was standing at the kitchen counter when I walked in, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice bright with excitement. "Yes, Mom. The travel agent said we could get the premium package for $38,000. It includes first-class flights and five-star hotels in London, Paris, and Rome." She turned when she heard my footsteps, her face lighting up with expectation. "How did it go at the dealership?" she asked, covering the phone. "Everything smooth?" I set my keys on the counter and looked at my wife of 9 years. Really looked at her. When had she become someone I didn't recognize? When had the woman I married turned into someone who could forge documents and lie so easily? "We need to talk," I said. Something in my tone made her pause. "Mom, let me call you back." She hung up and turned to face me fully. "What's wrong? You look upset." "The police were at Premium Motors, Abigail." The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. "Police? What did they want?" "They wanted to know about the forged signature on the title transfer." She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The signature isn't mine, Abigail. They had a forensics expert examine it." "That's ridiculous. Of course it's your signature. I watched you sign it." But her voice was shaking now, and she couldn't meet my eyes. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the photos Detective Chen had let me take of the paperwork. "This is what you submitted to the dealership. Look at it." She glanced at the screen, then immediately looked away. "I don't see anything wrong with it." "You forged my name to sell my father's car." "I did not forge anything." The denial came out too loud, too desperate. "I had every right to sell that car. We're married. What's yours is mine." "Not when it comes to fraud, Abigail, not when it comes to stealing." She stepped back as if I had slapped her. "Stealing? How dare you accuse me of stealing from you? I'm your wife." "My wife wouldn't have done this." The words hung between us like a blade. Abigail's face went through several emotions: shock, hurt, anger, then something calculating and cold. "Fine," she said, crossing her arms. "Fine. Maybe I did sign your name, but you would have said yes anyway. You always let me handle the paperwork." "I would have said no, and you knew it. That's why you didn't ask." "Because you're too sentimental. You hold on to things that serve no purpose. That car was just sitting in the garage collecting dust, while we could have been living our lives." "Living our lives, or taking expensive vacations? What's wrong with wanting nice things? What's wrong with wanting to travel and see the world instead of staying home every weekend, polishing a car that nobody even sees?" I stared at her, finally, understanding the depth of the chasm between us. To her, the Mustang had always been just an object, an inconvenience that took up space and attention she thought belonged to her. "There's something else you should know," I said quietly. "What now?" "The car you sold for $40,000, it's worth $400,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Abigail blinked slowly, as if trying to process words spoken in a foreign language. "What did you say?" $400,000. It's one of 50 cars ever made with that engine configuration. The experts at Barrett-Jackson confirmed it. She staggered backward, hitting the kitchen island. "That's not possible." "It's completely possible. My father kept meticulous documentation, every receipt, every restoration record. The provenance makes it extremely valuable to collectors." Abigail's breathing became rapid and shallow. But you never said. You never told me it was worth." "Because I didn't know the exact figure, but more importantly, because it was never about the money." $400,000, she whispered, then suddenly her face contorted with rage. $400,000 and you kept it in our garage like some kind of hobby car? It's not a hobby car. It was my father's life's work. Your father's life's work just cost us $360,000. The kitchen door opened and Margaret Wilson walked in without knocking, as she always did. "Abigail, sweetie, I was thinking we should book the hotels before." She stopped when she saw our faces. "What's going on?" "Mom, we have a problem," Abigail said, her voice hollow. "What kind of problem?" I watched Abigail struggle with how to explain that she had committed fraud and cost her family hundreds of thousands of dollars. Finally, she just blurted it out. "The car was worth $400,000. Margaret laughed. "Don't be ridiculous, honey. David's old car wasn't worth anywhere near that much." "She's telling the truth," I said. "The police and automotive experts confirmed it. She sold a $400,000 car for $40,000. Margaret's laughter died. She looked back and forth between us, trying to understand. "That's not possible. It was just an old Mustang." "It was a 1967 Boss 429 Super Cobra jet, one of 50 ever made." The words seemed to hit Margaret like physical blows. She sank into one of our kitchen chairs, her face going gray. "Oh my God," she whispered. "James already put a deposit on the cruise, $5,000 non-refundable." My phone rang. James Wilson's name appeared on the screen. "Don't answer that," Abigail said quickly. But Margaret was already reaching for her own phone. "I have to tell him, Sarah too, she was going to quit her job to come on the trip." "Nobody has to quit anything," Abigail said desperately. "We'll figure this out. Maybe the experts are wrong, maybe it's not really worth that much." "The police have arrested the buyer who was trying to flip it at auction," I said. "They know exactly what it's worth." Margaret's phone was ringing. We could hear James's voice through the speaker, excited and loud. "Maggie, great news! I found a travel package that includes Switzerland. We could do 4 countries instead of 3. Margaret looked at me, then at Abigail, then at the phone in her hand. "James," she said slowly, "you need to come over here right now and call Sarah. Tell her not to quit her job." "Why? What's wrong? Just come over, now." She hung up and stared at us. "How much trouble are we in?" "You're not in trouble," I said. "Abigail is. She forged my signature to sell the car. That's fraud." "But we're family," Margaret protested, as if that somehow changed the legal reality. "Surely you're not going to press charges against your own wife." I thought about my father's letter, still folded in my pocket. I thought about 18 years of Saturday mornings, of shared dreams and careful restoration. I thought about the promise I had made to take care of his life's work. "She stole $400,000 from me," I said quietly. "What would you do?" Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Because we all knew what any reasonable person would do. The front door opened and James Wilson's voice echoed through the house. "Where is everyone? Maggie, you sounded strange on the phone." He appeared in the kitchen doorway with Sarah right behind him, both of them carrying travel brochures and looking excited. "We've been looking at tours of Tuscany," Sarah announced. "Dad thinks we could add Italy to the trip without going too far over budget." She stopped when she saw our faces. "What's going on?" James asked. Margaret looked at her husband and daughter, these people she loved who had been celebrating their good fortune just hours ago. "The car wasn't worth $40,000, she said simply. "So what was it worth?" James asked. $400,000. The travel brochures scattered across the floor as Sarah's hands went limp. James grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "That's not funny, Maggie." "It's not a joke," Abigail said, her voice barely audible. "The police confirmed it. I sold a $400,000 car for $40,000. The silence stretched on until Sarah finally found her voice. "But we already spent some of the money. Dad made deposits. I gave my boss notice." "I put $15,000 down on the cruise," James added, his voice hollow. "It's non-refundable." They all looked at me then as if I somehow held the solution to their problem, as if I could wave a magic wand and make their financial disaster disappear. But I wasn't their solution anymore. For 9 years, I had been the one who fixed things, who smoothed over problems, who made sure everyone was comfortable. Not this time. "The police want to see me at the station this afternoon," I said. "I'll be pressing full charges for fraud." "David, please," Abigail begged. "We can work this out. We're family." I looked around the kitchen at these people who had been so eager to celebrate the destruction of my most precious possession. People who had called my father's masterpiece a rust bucket and an eyesore. "No," I said quietly. "We're not." The police station smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. I sat across from Detective Chen in an interrogation room that had probably heard 1,000 confessions, watching her organize documents with methodical precision. "Mr. Hartley, before we begin your formal statement, I need to inform you about some developments in your case." My stomach tightened. What kind of developments? "Your wife hired an attorney, Marcus Webb from Webb & Associates. He's claiming this is all a misunderstanding between spouses, that you had given verbal consent for the sale." I let out a bitter laugh. "Verbal consent to forge my signature? That's what makes this complicated. He's arguing that you had discussed selling the car previously, that your wife reasonably believed she had permission to handle the transaction." "That's completely false." "I believe you. But proving intent to defraud in a marriage is more complex than you might think. Webb is good at creating reasonable doubt." She leaned back in her chair, studying my face. "However, we have some leverage. The buyer who purchased your Mustang? His name is Richard Blackstone. He runs a high-end car flipping operation, and when he discovered the true value, he didn't just threaten to sue the dealership." "What did he do?" "He's filed criminal charges against your wife for fraud and against Premium Motors for facilitating the sale of stolen property. He's also filing civil suits seeking the full $400,000 in damages." The room felt like it was spinning. $400,000 in damages. Plus legal fees and punitive damages. He's claiming emotional distress, lost business opportunities, damage to his reputation. If he wins, your wife could be liable for close to $500,000. I thought about the Wilson family gathered in my kitchen just hours ago, their faces gray with shock as they realized what Abigail's actions had cost them. James had already lost $15,000 on cruise deposits. Sarah had quit her job. Margaret was calculating how much of their retirement savings they would need to liquidate. "There's more," Detective Chen continued. "We executed a search warrant on your home this morning." "A search warrant? For what?" "Your wife's attorney claimed she had documentation proving you had authorized the sale. We needed to verify that claim." She slid a manila envelope across the table. "We didn't find any such documentation, but we found these." I opened the envelope and felt my blood turn cold. Bank statements, investment portfolios, insurance policies, all in Abigail's name only, some dating back 3 years. "Your wife has been systematically moving assets out of joint accounts," Detective Chen explained. "The house refinancing you mentioned? She didn't just add a power of attorney clause, she also removed your name from the deed." My hands shook as I flipped through the documents, checking accounts, savings, even my retirement fund. Abigail had been stealing from me for years, planning this moment when she could cash out and disappear. "How is this possible? I never signed papers removing my name from the deed." "That's what we're investigating. It appears your signature was forged on multiple documents over the past 3 years. Your wife didn't just steal your car, Mr. Hartley. She's been systematically stealing your entire financial life." I set the papers down before I could crush them in my fists. "How much?" "Approximately $280,000 in assets that should have been jointly owned." $280,000. Combined with the car, Abigail had stolen over $600,000 from me. The woman I had trusted, slept beside, shared my life with for 9 years. "We need your permission to expand the fraud investigation," Detective Chen said. "This goes far beyond one forged signature." I nodded, unable to speak. My phone buzzed with a text message. Margaret Wilson. "David, please call me. We need to talk." "Family pressure?" Detective Chen asked, noticing my expression. "They're panicking. They spent money they don't have, made commitments based on thinking they had $40,000 to play with. And now they're facing financial ruin if the civil suits succeed." Another text, this one from James Wilson. "Son, let's work this out like family. Abigail made a mistake, but we can fix this." Son. He had never called me son before. In 9 years of marriage, James Wilson had treated me like an inconvenience, someone taking up space at family gatherings. Now suddenly I was family again. "They're going to keep pressuring you," Detective Chen warned. "People facing financial destruction can become desperate." As if summoned by her words, my phone rang. Sarah Wilson's name appeared on the screen. "I should take this," I said. "Sarah?" "David, thank God. Listen, we need to meet, all of us. There has to be a way to fix this." "There's nothing to fix, Sarah. Abigail committed fraud." "But we didn't know. None of us knew the car was worth that much. You can't destroy an entire family over a mistake." "She didn't make a mistake. She forged my signature and stole my property. That's not a mistake, it's a crime." "David, please." "Dad put 15,000 down on the cruise. Mom cashed in her CDs to pay for the European hotels. I quit my job. If those civil suits go through, we'll lose everything." I closed my eyes, trying to block out the desperation in her voice. "You should have thought about that before celebrating the destruction of my father's life's work. We didn't know. You knew it mattered to me. You called it a rust bucket. You laughed about getting rid of an eyesore. You never asked what it meant to me. You just assumed you had the right to profit from its destruction." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Sarah, I'm not responsible for fixing the consequences of Abigail's crimes. She's your wife." "Not for much longer." I hung up and looked at Detective Chen, who had been listening to the conversation with interest. "Family loyalty is a powerful weapon," she observed. "They're going to keep trying to make you feel guilty for protecting yourself." "I know." "Are you prepared for that pressure? It's only going to get worse when the criminal charges are filed officially." Before I could answer, my phone rang again. This time it was Abigail herself. "David, where are you? We need to talk. Webb says if you drop the charges, we can work out a civil settlement. You could get your car back and we could move forward." "Move forward? You stole over $600,000 from me." "What are you talking about? I sold one car." "The police found your other forgeries, Abigail. The bank accounts, the house deed, the investment portfolios. You've been stealing from me for years." The silence stretched so long I thought she had hung up. "Abigail?" "I was protecting our future," she said finally, her voice small and broken. "You don't understand business. You would have made poor decisions. So you decided to make them for me by stealing my money? It's our money. We're married." "Not anymore. I'm filing for divorce and I'm pressing every criminal charge available." "David, you're angry. I understand that. But if you destroy me, you destroy my whole family. Is that really what you want?" I thought about Margaret and James, facing retirement with their savings depleted. Sarah, unemployed and scrambling to explain to her former boss why she couldn't return. The cascade of financial ruin that would follow if the civil suit succeeded. Then I thought about my father's hands guiding mine as we rebuilt a carburetor on a Saturday afternoon. The pride in his voice when the engine finally ran. The letter he had left me, warning me that someday someone might try to steal what we had built together. "You should have thought about your family before you decided to steal from mine," I said, and hung up. Detective Chen was watching me with something that might have been respect. "That was the right choice," she said. "It doesn't feel right, it feels necessary." "Sometimes those are the same thing." She gathered the documents back into their folders. "We'll need you to come in tomorrow to sign the expanded fraud complaint, and Mr. Hartley, you should probably change the locks on your house and check your credit reports immediately." As I drove home, my phone buzzed constantly with calls and texts from the Wilson family. Each message was more desperate than the last, offering compromises and deals, promising that Abigail would make amends if I would just drop the charges. But I wasn't interested in their compromises anymore. For 9 years, I had compromised. I had accepted their dismissive attitude toward my interests, their assumption that my feelings mattered less than their convenience. I had smiled and nodded when they mocked the things I cared about. The compromise had been entirely one-sided, and I was done. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw Abigail's car in the garage and lights on throughout the house. She was inside, probably packing, probably planning her next move. I sat in my car for a moment, my father's letter still in my pocket, and made a decision that would change everything. It was time to stop being reasonable. It was time to fight. 6 months later, I stood in my garage, running my hand along the familiar curves of my father's Mustang. The 1967 Boss 429 gleamed under the fluorescent lights, every surface perfect, every component exactly as it should be. The legal battles were finally over. Abigail had been sentenced to 18 months in prison for fraud and identity theft. The civil suits had resulted in the seizure of every asset she had stolen, plus damages that would follow her for years to come. The Wilson family had lost their house, their retirement savings, and their dreams of European vacations. But none of that mattered now as I turned the key and heard the 429 roar to life. The engine sounded exactly as it had the day my father and I completed the restoration 14 years ago. Deep, powerful, alive with the sound of honest American muscle. I let it idle for a moment, listening to the rhythm that had become the soundtrack to my best memories. Detective Chen had called the previous week to tell me the case was officially closed. "Your car will be released tomorrow," she had said. "Premium Motors is handling the transfer back to you. They're also covering all the storage and insurance costs as part of their settlement agreement." "What about Blackstone, the buyer?" "He dropped his civil suit against you once we proved the fraud charges. Turns out he's had his own legal problems with questionable car transactions. He didn't want the scrutiny." I had driven to Premium Motors that morning, my hands shaking slightly as Rick Morrison handed me the original keys. The same keys my father had pressed into my palm 27 years ago, telling me to take care of his baby. "I'm sorry for everything you went through," Rick had said. "We never should have processed that sale without verifying the documentation more carefully." "You weren't the one who committed fraud," I had replied. "You were victims too." Now, sitting behind the wheel in my own garage, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. The kind of deep, settled calm that comes from knowing you've fought for something that mattered and won. My phone buzzed with a text message. Sarah Wilson. "David, I know you probably don't want to hear from us, but I wanted you to know Mom's doing better. The new apartment is small but clean, and Dad found work at the hardware store. I'm working 2 jobs now. We're surviving." I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "I'm glad you're all safe." It was the first contact I'd had with any of them since the sentencing hearing. They had looked broken that day, aged beyond their years, facing a future without the financial security they had taken for granted. Margaret had cried when the judge read Abigail's sentence. James had simply stared straight ahead, his face gray with shock. Sarah's response came quickly. "I never said this before, but I'm sorry. We were wrong about your car. We were wrong about a lot of things." I typed and deleted several responses before settling on, "Thank you for saying that." There was no point in rehashing the past and explaining how their dismissive attitude had hurt me over the years. They were paying the price for their choices now, and while I felt no satisfaction in their suffering, I also felt no obligation to ease it. I put the phone away and pulled out of the garage, following the same back roads my father and I used to take when I was learning to handle the Mustang's power. The afternoon sun slanted through the trees, painting everything in golden light. At the crest of Miller's Hill, I pulled over at the scenic overlook where Dad and I used to stop during our drives. The valley spread out below, unchanged since the last time we had been here together. I reached into my pocket and pulled out his letter, now worn soft from handling. I had read it dozens of times over the past 6 months, finding new meaning in his words each time. "The real value isn't in dollars," I read aloud to the empty valley. "It's in the love we poured into every bolt, every carefully restored component." A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding the thermal currents with effortless grace. Dad would have stopped to watch it, commenting on the bird's patience, its willingness to wait for the right moment to act. I thought about the patience he had taught me during those 18 years of restoration. How to wait for the right part, the right moment, the right technique, how to build something lasting instead of rushing toward a quick result. That patience had served me well during the legal battles. While the Wilson family had panicked and made desperate choices, I had waited. I had let the evidence speak for itself, let the system work as it was designed to work. My phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Hartley, this is Tom Bradley from Classic Car Weekly. I'm calling about your 1967 Boss 429. "What about it?" "We'd like to feature it in an upcoming article about barn finds and hidden treasures. The story of its recovery has become something of a legend in the collector community." I smiled, thinking about how my father would have reacted to his life's work being called legendary. "Mr. Bradley, the car was never lost. It was just loved by people who understood what it represented." "That's exactly the kind of perspective we're looking for. Would you be willing to be interviewed?" I considered the offer. Part of me wanted to keep the car private, to protect it from the kind of attention that turns passion into commerce. But another part of me thought my father would want people to know about the work we had done together, about what could be accomplished with patience and dedication. "I'll think about it," I said. "There would be compensation, of course. This kind of feature typically pays $5,000. $5,000. A year ago, that amount would have mattered to me. Now it seemed almost irrelevant. The real compensation was having the car back, being able to honor my father's memory in the way he had intended. Like I said, I'll think about it. After I hung up, I sat in the driver's seat watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. Tomorrow was Saturday. For the first time in 6 months, I would be able to spend it the way my father and I always had, in the garage, working on something that mattered. The Mustang didn't need any major restoration work, but there were always small things to maintain, adjustments to make, surfaces to clean and polish. The kind of meditative work that connected me to 18 years of shared Saturday mornings. I started the engine and pulled back onto the road, heading home through the gathering twilight. The Mustang's headlights cut through the dusk as I drove past the house where Abigail and I had lived together, now empty and for sale. The Wilson family had moved to a small apartment across town, their dreams of European travel replaced by the reality of rebuilding their lives. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, but I also felt no guilt. They had made their choices, just as I had made mine. The difference was that my choices had been based on love and respect, while theirs had been based on greed and dismissal. When I pulled into my new driveway, a small house with a large garage, perfect for my needs, I sat for a moment in the car, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Through the garage windows, I could see my father's workbench exactly as he had left it, waiting for Saturday morning to arrive. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the red shop rag I had found in his toolbox, that first terrible morning when I discovered the Mustang was gone. The fabric was still stained with decades of honest work, still carried the faint scent of motor oil and WD-40. Tomorrow I would use it to polish the chrome bumpers, to wipe down the engine bay, to maintain the car that had become the bridge between my father's legacy and my own future. I turned off the engine and stepped out of the car, my hand trailing along its perfect surface. In the silence of the garage, I could almost hear my father's voice, patient and encouraging, guiding me through the next phase of our shared journey. The car was home. I was home. And for the first time in years, that was enough. I walked into the house, leaving the garage light on so the Mustang wouldn't sit in darkness. Through the kitchen window, I could see it gleaming under the fluorescent bulbs, patient and beautiful and exactly where it belonged. On the refrigerator, held by a simple magnet, was my father's letter, not the one from his final documentation, but an older one he had written to me when I was 25, just before he got sick. "Son," it read, "the most important thing I can teach you is that some things in this world are worth fighting for, not because they're valuable, but because they represent something that can't be replaced. Love, honor, integrity. These things have to be defended sometimes. I hope you never have to learn that lesson the hard way, but if you do, I know you'll make the right choice." I had made the right choice, and now finally I was free.